Although Matthew, you know what's interesting?
Please tell me.
First of all, yes, no, this is really cool. So the very first thing is, what no one ever asks is, why does Joseph abstain from relations with Mary on their wedding night?
Yeah.
Everyone says, well, why would Mary remain a virgin if she's married? I'll put you one further. Why would Joseph abstain from relations with his wife on the wedding night?
That's right.
And for the whole 9 months after. There's nothing in the virginal conception that would require Joseph to abstain, to practice abstinence within marriage. In fact, the whole point of the wedding night for Jews was the consummation of the marriage, because the betrothal would take place a year before. They're already legally married. To have relations during the betrothal period is adultery in Jewish law. And the only point of the wedding ceremony, like the coming together, is for the bride and the groom to consummate the marriage on the wedding night. That's what the 7 days we're celebrating, right? But the very verse in Matthew 1:25 people use as evidence against perpetual virginity is the verse that shows us that Mary and Joseph do not have an ordinary marriage, because on their wedding night, they don't consummate. That is shocking. That's unprecedented. And Matthew 1:25 gives us evidence for Joseph's abstinence. And that raises a whole host of questions. Now, once you've got that in mind, then you can pivot to Luke chapter 1. Because in Luke chapter 1, there's something else strange about their marriage from Mary's point of view. When the angel appears to Mary and says, you're going to have a baby, and Mary's betrothed, she doesn't say, oh, praise be to God, which is what any normal woman would say who's engaged and about to get married. I mean, yeah, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby carriage. I mean,
right.
Yeah, that's just how everyone knows that. But everyone assumes the angel tells her it's going to be virginal first, but he doesn't. If you read Luke really carefully, all he says is, you're going to have a baby. And her response should be, that's wonderful. But that's not what she says. Instead, in Luke 135, she says, how shall this be, since I know not man?
Right.
And scholars, since ancient times, they puzzle. Augustine, Ephraim, they say, this is mysterious because the only thing that makes sense of her response is that she's taken a vow of virginity.
Right.
Because to not know man means to not have marital relations with man. It has the same Greek force in Greek as I don't smoke, right? I don't smoke means I don't smoke now in the present, and I don't intend on smoking in the future as well. So why would a betrothed woman respond to the announcement of a child being born by saying, how shall this be, since I don't know man? And the only plausible explanation that makes sense of the text and doesn't try to escape it is that she has taken some vow of virginity. Now, everyone's known this for centuries, but many scholars will say, but historically that's not plausible, because we don't have any evidence for Jewish women taking vows of abstinence within marriage, right? And it is true that if you look at like the Essenes in the 1st century AD in Israel, or the Therapeutai in Egypt, there were Jewish celibate women. There were women who took vows of virginity, but they were celibate. They were unmarried, right? So people say those parallels don't work to show that Mary was a Jewish woman who had taken a vow of sexual abstinence, because she's married. She's not living a celibate life, meaning celibate as unmarried. And what I show in the book is what everyone has overlooked is that there is actually evidence for Jewish women taking vows of sexual abstinence within marriage. And guess where it's hidden?
Where, Brant?
It's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not in the rabbis. It's not in the Talmud. It's not in the Mishnah. It's not in some obscure scroll. It's in the Old Testament.
What?
It's hidden. What? Yeah. It's hidden in the book of Numbers.
Pay attention, people, because it's going to blow your mind. Go ahead, man.
No. Well, if you want to hide something, put it in Numbers, because nobody reads Numbers.
Nobody reads Numbers, man. Right after Leviticus.
It's his fault for calling it Numbers. It's not the most enticing title.
When you say his, who do you mean?
I'm not talking about that. That's actually not the name in Hebrew. That's the Greek title. Arithmoites things that do it. I'm just messing. It's called a joke. Anyway, no. In Numbers chapter 30, there's actually a whole chapter dedicated to vows taken by women. And the vows in question are called a vow to afflict yourself or a vow to deny yourself. You can translate it either way. And as Jacob Milgram, the great Pentateuchal scholar, Jewish scholar, has shown, that language of afflict or deny yourself can be used to refer to fasting or sexual abstinence.
Pow.
And in the context of never, that's exactly right. In Numbers 30, what it's doing is it's saying if a young girl in her father's house takes a vow to deny herself and the father accepts it, it is binding. And if a widow takes a vow to deny herself, it's binding. But then it adds a third category. If a married woman takes a vow to deny herself and her husband hears of it and he approves of it, then the vow is binding. But it adds this caveat. It says, but if he makes them null and void after he has heard of them, then he shall bear her iniquity. In other words, if he changes his mind, then the fault is with him and not with the woman. Now, it's entirely possible that there were so many Jewish husbands upset about their wives fasting that they had to write a whole book of laws in Numbers 30. But I think it's more plausible to suggest that the reason they had to devote a whole chapter to this was to deal with the question of a young woman who had taken a vow to deny herself, whose husband accepted it at first, but then thought better of it afterwards and had her renege on the vow. And what it's saying is the sin goes to him and not to her. So in a nutshell, then, we actually, and this isn't just Numbers. If you do go in to look at the Mishnah and stuff, there are texts in the Mishnah that actually have to mitigate some of this and deal with problems that these kind of vows actually would cause within marriage. Okay, it's in Mishnah. Well, actually, it's in a few different tractates. I'm not going to go through them right now, but for you can read the book and it's all in there, right? So
thanks. Going through the Mishnah right now. Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. Thank you. Okay. Well, but here's the issue. So, in other words, according to the Bible itself, if Mary has taken some kind of vow of virginity, which is what the text of Luke chapter 1 implies, it's the only thing that makes sense of her answer to the angel.
Augustine, Aquinas, and others point to this, right?
And Ephraim, I think it's Ephraim. I can't remember if it's Ephraim or Augustine. No, I think it's Augustine and Chrysostom. I'd have to look at the end of the chapter there. It's a couple of the early fathers, 4th century, East and West. I showed there are Eastern and Western Christians. That's how they read the text, right? They see it as implied vow of virginity. If there's evidence for that in Luke, then it actually makes sense in a 1st century Jewish context, because according to the book of Numbers, if Mary took a vow like that and then tells Joseph about it and her husband hears of it and he accepts the vow, then the vow is binding.
Wow. So in other words, once again, the Catholic dogma really can trace its origins back into Scripture.
Old Testament.
Yeah.